The massive alien ship hung above Earth like a silver cloud. It had appeared 3 days ago, causing panic at first, then wonder as it made no aggressive moves. Now Ambassador John Harris stood in the shuttle bay of the U.S. Intrepid, adjusting his tie one final time. "Ready, Ambassador?" Captain Lisa Reeves asked, her voice steady despite the historic moment. John nodded. As ready as anyone can be for humanity's first alien encounter. The diplomatic team of 6 boarded the shuttle. Besides John and Lisa, there was Dr. Eric Powell, xenobiologist, Commander Grace Martinez, military advisor, Ben Taylor, linguistics expert, and Deputy Ambassador Susan Kelly. The shuttle lifted off smoothly toward the alien vessel. "Remember," John said, "we represent all of Earth today." As they approached, a section of the silver hull slid open, revealing a brightly lit docking bay. Their shuttle settled inside with a gentle bump. "Atmosphere is breathable," Eric confirmed, checking his instruments. "Temperature and pressure normal." The shuttle door opened. Standing before them were 3 aliens. The tallest had blue-tinted skin, 4 arms, and large eyes that seemed to shimmer with intelligence. The second was shorter with features that reminded John of an Earth octopus, but standing upright. The third resembled a mantis, green and delicate. The blue alien stepped forward. "I am High Counselor Zixvar of the Galactic Concord. We welcome Earth to the community of sentient species." Ben's translation device worked perfectly, converting the strange sounds into English. "Thank you," John replied, bowing slightly. "I am Ambassador John Harris of Earth. We are honored by your visit." The aliens guided them through corridors of gleaming metal to a large chamber with a circular table. As they walked, Zixvar explained that the Concord included 27 different species, all living in peace for over 800 years. "How did you achieve such lasting peace?" John asked. "We eliminated the primary cause of conflict," Zixvar answered. "We outlawed all weapons." Commander Martinez tiffened beside John. The meeting lasted hours. The aliens were friendly and curious about Earth. But when John showed them historical records as a gesture of openness, the aliens grew disturbed. "You have fought wars?" the octopus-like alien asked, his tentacles curling in distress. "Our history contains conflict," John admitted, "but we've made great progress toward peace." The aliens conferred privately, their voices low. When they returned, Zixvar's expression was serious. "We offer Earth provisional membership in the Concord," he said, "but there is one condition. All weapons must be surrendered." "All weapons," Commander Martinez repeated. "Yes. The Concord has no need for instruments of violence. No member species possesses weapons of any kind." Back on the shuttle, tension filled the air. "We can't disarm completely," Lisa argued. "It's a security risk." "The Concord has maintained peace for centuries," Susan countered. "Maybe they know something we don't." John gazed out at Earth below. The benefits of joining the Concord are enormous. Advanced technology, interstellar travel, cultural exchange. "At the cost of our ability to defend ourselves," Martinez said. 6 weeks later, the United Nations voted to accept the Concord's terms. Weapons facilities worldwide began the conversion to peaceful purposes. Military personnel were reassigned. Warships were reproposed or dismantled. On the day the process was completed, John stood again in the great chamber of the Concord vessel. "Earth has complied with your requirements," he announced. "All weapons have been surrendered." Zixvar made a gesture that Ben's translator identified as satisfaction. "Then we welcome Earth as the 28th member of the Galactic Concord. May our peaceful cooperation last for millennia." Captain Lisa Reeves watched from the back of the room, her expression neutral. But inside, a small voice whispered that humans had survived on Earth by being ready for anything. She hoped the aliens never discovered what humanity could do even without conventional weapons. As if reading her thoughts, Zixvar turned to her. "A question troubles you, Captain?" "No," she replied with a smile. I'm just eager to begin this new chapter of human history. 6 months had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Concord. Major Frank Collins looked out the window of his new quarters on Concord Station Alpha. The massive space station orbited a beautiful blue-green planet far from Earth. Frank still wasn't used to the view. Cultural liaison, Frank muttered to himself. That was his new title. After 15 years in the military, he was now teaching aliens about human customs. It wasn't what he had trained for, but orders were orders. A soft chime at his door announced a visitor. Frank opened it to find Keelan, the mantis-like alien scientist he had befriended last month. Good cycle, Frank, Keelan said, his translator converting clicks and whistles into English. Are we still meeting for your demonstration today? Frank smiled. Absolutely. The training room is ready. They walked together through the station's wide corridors. Many aliens nodded respectfully to Frank. Humans were still a novelty here. I have studied your history files, Keelan said. Your species developed many forms of combat without weapons. This is unusual. Martial arts go back thousands of years on Earth, Frank explained. Many started as ways to defend yourself when you had nothing else. Keelan's large compound eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of interest. The concept of fighting without weapons is foreign to all Concord species. Before we banned weapons, combat meant using tools designed to harm. The training room was a large open space with soft mats covering the floor. 10 aliens of various species waited inside, all curious about human physical culture, as they called it. Today I'll demonstrate some basic self-defense techniques, Frank announced. He began with simple movements, blocks, stances, and controlled falls. The aliens watched with fascination. When Frank demonstrated how to escape from a wrist grab using leverage rather than strength, excited murmurs filled the room. Would anyone like to try? Frank asked. A hesitant Keelan stepped forward. Frank showed him how to position his limbs, moving slowly to avoid alarming the scientist. Now try to escape when I grab your arm, Frank instructed. Keelan executed the move perfectly, twisting away from Frank's grip with surprising grace. Excellent, Frank praised. You're a natural. Other aliens tried with varying success. Most found it difficult to grasp the concepts behind human martial arts. Their species had never developed such techniques. After the session, Samantha Green, a former intelligence officer now working as a communications specialist, approached Frank. Quite the teacher, she said with a smile. They looked impressed. Frank shrugged. They see it as an exotic human dance form. They don't understand its purpose. Samantha's expression grew serious. We need to talk. Privately. Later in Frank's quarters, Samantha pulled out a datapad. I've been monitoring Concord communications. There's something concerning at the edge of Concord space. What kind of concerning? Frank asked. A species called the Voth. They applied for Concord membership a century ago, but refused to disarm. The Concord rejected them. She showed Frank images of reptilian beings with advanced technology. Now they're getting aggressive. They've been spotted near the Talaris research station. Frank frowned. And the Concord has no military, no weapons, and no defense strategy. Exactly. I shared this with Ambassador Harris. He tried raising it with the Council, but they dismissed it as a minor diplomatic misunderstanding. The Concord has been at peace so long they can't imagine a real threat, Frank said. Samantha nodded. Harris is quietly gathering ex-military humans for contingency planning. He wants you involved. Frank stared out at the stars. 6 months ago, he'd surrendered his weapons as ordered. Now he might need to remember everything he knew about fighting without them. Tell Harris I'm in, he said, and let's keep the self-defense classes going. Something tells me the Concord might need those skills sooner than they think. Across the station, Keelan practiced the movements Frank had taught him, finding a strange satisfaction in the fluid motions. The concept of defense without weapons was fascinating. He wondered if there might be more to learn from these unusual humans. The emergency alarm woke Frank from a deep sleep. Red lights flashed throughout his quarters as the station's AI announced. All council members and diplomatic staff report to the Grand Chamber immediately. Frank dressed quickly and ran into Samantha in the corridor. "It's happening," she said, keeping her voice low despite the rush of aliens around them. The Voth attacked the Talaris research station. The Grand Chamber was in chaos when they arrived. Representatives from all 28 species talked over each other, their translator devices creating a jumble of overlapping voices. High Counselor Zixbar stood at the center, trying to restore order. Ambassador Harris spotted Frank and Samantha and waved them over. "How bad is it?" Frank asked. "Bad," Harris replied. "The Talaris station sent a distress signal 4 hours ago. It went silent shortly after. The Voth destroyed the station's communication array and took the scientists hostage." Zixvar finally brought the room to order. "Fellow representatives, we face a grave situation. The Voth have committed an act of aggression against the Concord for the first time in 800 years. Images appeared on the large screen behind him. A research station with visible damage and several Voth ships surrounding it. "What are our options?" asked a bulky alien representative. "We must negotiate," said another. "The Voth have already rejected diplomatic communication," Zixbar replied. "They demand the Concord surrender all scientific data and advanced technology on the station. Then we must comply to save lives," suggested the octopus-like counselor. Harris stepped forward. "With respect, that approach may encourage further aggression." All eyes turned to the human ambassador. "The Voth refused to disarm a century ago," Harris continued. "They've likely been building their military capability since then. If they succeed in this attack, they will target other Concord facilities." "What do you suggest, Ambassador?" Zixvar asked. "Let a human team assess the situation. We have experience with such conflicts." Murmurs filled the room, many disapproving. "You suggest violence?" asked a horrified counselor. "I suggest a measured response," Harris clarified. "My people can evaluate the situation without escalating it." After hours of debate, the council reluctantly agreed to send a human observation team aboard a Concord vessel to assess the situation at Talaris. Later, in a private room, Harris met with Frank, Samantha, and several other ex-military humans. "The council approved our mission, but with strict limitations," Harris explained. "We're to observe only, not engage. The ship leaves in 3 hours." "What's the real mission?" Frank asked. "Rescue the scientists, if possible, and gather intelligence on Voth capabilities." "Without weapons?" asked a former Navy SEAL named Paul Rodriguez. Harris smiled grimly. "The council doesn't understand that humans don't need conventional weapons to be effective." "What's our cover?" Samantha asked. "Captain Alan Ward will command the Concord vessel Harmony. The rest of you are cultural experts studying the Voth." Frank nodded. "And if things go wrong?" "Use your judgment," Harris said. "But remember, the future relationship between humanity and the Concord may depend on how we handle this." As the meeting ended, Keelan was waiting outside. "Frank, I heard about the mission," he said. "How did you?" "Information travels quickly here," Keelan interrupted. "I request to join your team." Frank hesitated. "It could be dangerous." "I have been studying your defensive techniques. I may be useful," Keelan insisted. "Besides, you will need a science officer who understands the station's systems." Frank considered this. Having a Concord scientist might help navigate both the station and the complicated politics. "I'll speak with Ambassador Harris," Frank promised. 3 hours later, the Harmony departed Concord Station Alpha. On board were 12 humans and Keelan, the lone Concord representative. Captain Ward set course for the Talaris research station. As they entered faster than light travel, Frank stared at the streaking stars. The Concord had enjoyed peace for centuries by avoiding conflict at all costs. Now they would learn if that strategy could survive contact with an enemy who didn't share their values. "We're about to make history," Samantha said, joining him at the viewport. "Let's hope it's the kind worth remembering," Frank replied. The Harmony dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the Talaris research station. From the bridge, Frank could see the damage clearly. Parts of the station were dark, and debris floated nearby. 3 Voth ships surrounded the station like predators circling wounded prey. "Life signs?" Captain Ward asked. "Multiple readings," Helan replied, studying the console. "Both Concord scientists and what appear to be Voth signatures." "Open a channel," Ward ordered. The main screen flickered, revealing a reptilian face. The Voth had scales in various shades of green and yellow, with sharp teeth visible when he spoke. "I am Commander Cyrex of the Voth Dominion," the alien said. "Identify yourselves." "Captain Alan Ward of the Concord vessel Harmony. We've come to check on our research station." Cyrex's eyes narrowed. "This station and all its occupants now belong to the Voth. Leave immediately or face consequences." Frank stepped forward. "We request the release of the Concord scientists. They're non-combatants conducting peaceful research." "Non-combatants," Cyrex repeated with what sounded like amusement. "Yes, the Concord abandoned the art of war long ago. A mistake the Voth did not make." "We can negotiate," Ward began. "There will be no negotiation," Cyrex interrupted. "You have 1 hour to leave this sector, or we will seize your vessel as well." The screen went dark. "Options?" Ward asked the bridge crew. "We can't abandon the scientists," Samantha said. Paul Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "They don't know humans have combat experience. That's our advantage." Ward nodded. "We need a plan." For the next 40 minutes, they prepared. Frank divided the humans into 3 teams. Samantha would lead the tech team to disable the Voth communications. Paul would take a rescue team to find the scientists. Frank and Keelan would create a diversion. When the hour was nearly up, Cyrex called again. "Your time is ending, Captain Ward," he said. "What is your decision?" "We need more time to prepare our departure," Ward stalled. Cyrex's expression hardened. "Prepare to be boarded." Minutes later, a Voth shuttle docked with the Harmony. 20 armed Voth soldiers forced their way onto the ship. In the main corridor, they found Captain Ward waiting calmly with several Concord crew members, including Keelan. The Voth pointed their weapons at the group. "Where are the humans?" demanded the Voth leader. "I'm right here," said Frank, stepping out from a side passage. The Voth turned toward him, weapons raised. In that moment, Frank moved. He grabbed the nearest Voth's weapon arm, twisted, and sent the alien crashing into his companions. Paul dropped from a maintenance hatch in the ceiling, landing on 2 more Voth. Samantha emerged from another corridor, throwing a container of cleaning solution that created a slippery surface under the Voth's feet. Several aliens fell, their weapons sliding away. The Concord crew watched in shock as the humans engaged the Voth in hand-to-hand combat. Frank blocked a punch from a Voth soldier and countered with a sweep that took the alien's legs out from under him. Paul used a maintenance tool like a staff, keeping 3 Voth at bay. To everyone's surprise, Keelan joined the fight, using the moves Frank had taught him to disable a Voth by leveraging the alien's weight against him. "What is this?" shouted the Voth leader as his soldiers were systematically disarmed and disabled, without a single conventional weapon being used. "Human combat," Frank answered, dodging a strike and responding with a precise blow to a pressure point he had identified in the Voth anatomy charts. Within minutes, all 20 Voth were subdued. The Concord crew stared in amazement at the humans and at Keelan. "I had no idea such fighting was possible without weapons," one Concord officer whispered. Frank secured the last Voth soldier with improvised restraints. "This was just the first wave," he warned. "Once Cyrex realizes his boarding party failed, he'll send more." Ward turned to his stunned crew. "We need to take the fight to the Voth ships before that happens. Any volunteers?" Every human raised a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Keelan raised his as well. Frank looked at the captured Voth weapons with mixed feelings. The Concord's ban on weapons had been absolute for 800 years. Yet here they were, facing an enemy who didn't play by those rules. "We can't use these," Captain Ward said firmly, following Frank's gaze. "If we use Voth weapons, we betray everything the Concord stands for." Frank nodded. "We won't need them." The human team gathered in the ship's cargo bay, collecting tools and equipment. Samantha found communication devices they could use to stay in touch. Paul organized cooking utensils, maintenance tools, and cleaning supplies into improvised defensive gear. "Our priority is rescuing the scientists," Frank reminded everyone. "We board the station, find our people, and get out." Keelan approached Frank, holding a long metal pipe he had removed from a spare parts container. "I have been practicing," he said, demonstrating a defensive stance Frank had taught him. Frank smiled. "Keep that up, and you'll be teaching me soon." 3 teams prepared to board the station through different access points. Frank would lead the main team, with Keelan and 4 humans. Samantha would take 2 techs to the control room. Paul's team would search for the captured scientists. "The Voth will expect us to give up after the first skirmish," Ward said. "They don't understand humans yet." The teams moved through the connecting tunnels between the Harmony and the research station. Inside, emergency lights cast red shadows across the corridors. Frank's team encountered 2 Voth guards at the first junction. Before the aliens could raise their weapons, Frank and a former boxer named Kyle rushed forward. Kyle blocked the first guard's weapon arm, while Frank used a quick strike to the Voth's throat. The second guard fired, missing Frank by inches. Keelan swung his metal pipe, hitting the guard's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor. Frank finished the job with a precise kick. "Nice work," Frank told Keelan. Similar scenes played out across the station as the human teams moved through the corridors. The Voth, confident in their weapons, were unprepared for close combat with humans who could move faster and think quicker in battle. Samantha's team reached the control room and began working to restore communications and life support. Paul's team found the scientists locked in a laboratory. "We're here to help," Paul told the frightened aliens. "Stay behind us and move quickly." On the main Voth ship, Commander Cyrex grew increasingly angry as reports came in of his forces being overwhelmed. "Impossible," he snarled. "They have no weapons." He ordered all his remaining forces to the station's central hub. Frank's team arrived at the hub first, finding themselves surrounded by Voth soldiers. The reptilian aliens aimed their weapons at the humans and Keelan. "Surrender now," the Voth commander ordered. Frank looked at his team, then at the Voth. "We'll handle this the Earth way." The humans burst into action. They used tables, chairs, and pieces of equipment as shields and weapons. Kyle knocked a Voth down with a serving tray from the station's cafeteria. Another human used a fire extinguisher to create a cloud of chemicals that confused the Voth. Keelan surprised everyone, moving gracefully through the chaos. His 4 limbs gave him advantages in close combat that even the humans didn't have. From a security monitor, Commander Cyrex watched in disbelief as his troops fell to unarmed opponents. His species had evolved to rely on tools and weapons. They had never developed the kind of physical combat skills the humans displayed. "What are these creatures?" he whispered. Back on the Harmony, Captain Ward received word that all teams had accomplished their objectives. The scientists were safe, and the station was under their control. Word spread quickly through the Concorde crew. They gathered at viewports and monitors, watching in awe as humans demonstrated combat skills that had been forgotten in the Concorde for centuries. "They fight without weapons," one engineer said in wonder. "How is this possible?" Ward looked at the amazed faces around him. "That's just the beginning of what humans can do," he said. "And I think the Concorde might need those skills more than they realize." 2 weeks after the incident at Talaris Station, Frank stood before the full Concorde Council. The circular chamber was packed with representatives from all 28 species. Ambassador Harris sat at the human delegation's table, his expression serious. Major Collins, High Counselor Zixvar began, "Your actions at Talaris have created much discussion within the Concord." Frank stood tall. "We did what was necessary to protect Concord citizens. By engaging in violence," said the octopus-like counselor, his tentacles waving in agitation. "By defending those who could not defend themselves," Frank corrected. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices. Some demanded humans be censured for breaking Concord principles. Others argued that the rescue could not have succeeded any other way. Zixvar raised all four of his arms for silence. "While we debate, we face a larger problem. The Voth have not retreated. Our long-range sensors show they are gathering more ships. Commander Cyrex has vowed to return with a larger force." Silence fell over the chamber. "What do they want?" asked the counselor. "Dominance," Ambassador Harris answered simply. "The Voth were rejected by the Concord because they refused to disarm. They'd spent a century building their military while the Concord focused on peace." Keelan stepped forward from the crowd. "If I may speak." Zixvar nodded. "I witnessed how the humans fought at Talaris," Keelan said. "They did not use weapons, yet they prevailed against armed opponents. I believe they can teach us to defend ourselves without betraying our principles." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "You suggest we learn to fight?" a counselor asked, the concept clearly foreign to him. "I suggest we learn to defend," Keelan clarified. "There is a difference." After hours of debate, the council made an unprecedented decision. Frank would establish a training program to teach defensive techniques to volunteers from all Concord species. Samantha would create an intelligence network to monitor Voth movements. Captain Ward would coordinate the defense of Concord Central. Over the next 10 days, the training center grew. Hundreds of Concord citizens volunteered, then thousands. Frank was surprised by how quickly some species adapted to human fighting styles. The bird-like Avari were naturally quick and agile. The four-armed Korath, Zixvar's species, could execute complex holds impossible for humans. Keelan became Frank's assistant instructor, demonstrating moves to his fellow Concord citizens. "Balance and leverage," he explained to a group, "not strength alone." Meanwhile, Samantha's intelligence confirmed their fears. The Voth were coming with a fleet 3 times larger than before. "They'll be here in 2 days, she told Frank as they observed the training. Frank nodded. "How's the station preparation going?" "Paul has teams setting up barriers and choke points throughout Concord Central. Captain Ward has adapted maintenance vessels to create a defensive perimeter." "Will it be enough?" Frank wondered. Before Samantha could answer, the emergency sirens blared. Over the station's communication system, Captain Ward's voice rang out. "All personnel to defensive positions. Voth fleet detected on approach. This is not a drill." The Concord citizens looked to Frank and the other humans for guidance. Fear was evident in their expressions, but something else too: determination. "Remember your training," Frank told them. "Focus on protecting each other, not defeating the enemy." On the command deck, Ambassador Harris and Zixvar watched the massive Voth fleet approach on the main screen. "We should have had more time," Harris said grimly. "Perhaps," Zixvar replied. "But in the past 2 weeks, I have seen more courage from my people than in centuries of peace." Commander Cyrex's face appeared on the screen. "Concord Station," he said with a sneer, "your defiance at Talaris was unexpected but futile. Surrender now, or we will take your station by force." Harris stepped forward. "The Concord does not surrender to threats." Cyrex laughed. "Then prepare to be boarded." Around Concord Central, humans and aliens took their positions. The peace-loving Concord was about to face the greatest test in 800 years, armed with nothing but their wits, improvised tools, and 2 weeks of human combat training. The first wave of Voth soldiers poured into Concord Central through multiple boarding points. They moved with confidence, weapons ready, expecting little resistance. What they found instead surprised them. In the main corridor, a group of bird-like Avari dropped from the ceiling. knocking weapons aside before the Voth could fire. In the East Wing, 4 armed Korath used their extra limbs to grapple and disarm the invaders. Throughout the station, Concord citizens who had never fought before put their new training to use. Frank led a team defending the central hub. "Remember, disable their weapons first," he called out as Voth soldiers rounded the corner. Kyle slid across the polished floor, sweeping the legs from under 2 Voth. Samantha used a food cart as a battering ram, knocking 3 more off balance. Frank engaged the squad leader directly, blocking a strike and countering with a precise blow to the throat. On the command deck, Ambassador Harris and High Counselor Zixbar monitored the battle through security feeds. "They're actually doing it," Zixbar said in wonder as he watched his people fighting back. "Humans aren't special because we can fight," Harris explained. "We're special because we learned when not to fight, while remembering how when necessary." Outside the station, Captain Ward directed maintenance vessels in harassment maneuvers. The small craft couldn't damage the Voth warships, but they disrupted targeting systems and blocked boarding craft. Commander Cyrex grew increasingly frustrated as reports came in of Voth soldiers being overwhelmed by supposedly peaceful Concord citizens. "Impossible," he roared. "They had no combat skills 2 weeks ago." "The humans," his lieutenant explained. "They've been teaching them." Cyrex's eyes narrowed. "Then I will deal with the humans myself." In the station's educational center, a group of Voth found not the easy targets they expected, but Keelan and a dozen Concord citizens protecting young ones. The aliens had barricaded the doors and prepared improvised weapons from classroom materials. "You cannot win," the Voth leader sneered. "Stand aside." Keelan stepped forward, holding a metal pointer like a staff. "We will not." When the Voth rushed forward, Keelan moved with a grace that surprised even himself. The combat forms Frank had taught him flowed naturally now. His 4 limbs became a blur as he disarmed the first Voth, using the alien's momentum to throw him into his companions. The other Concord citizens joined the fight, working together as Frank had shown them. Within minutes, all the Voth in the room were subdued, tied with cords and strips of fabric. One of the younglings looked at Keelan with wide eyes. "You saved us." "We saved each other," Keelan corrected gently. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out. The Voth, relying on weapons and intimidation, found themselves facing opponents who used teamwork and their natural abilities in ways the Voth never expected. After 3 hours of fighting, Commander Cyrex called a retreat. The Voth fleet pulled back to a safe distance. In the council chamber, representatives gathered to assess the situation. Many showed signs of the battle: torn clothing, minor injuries, expressions of exhaustion mixed with pride. "We have won a reprieve, not a victory," Frank cautioned. "The Voth will return with new tactics." "And we will be ready," Zixvar replied. "The Concord has existed for 800 years through peace. Perhaps it will survive the next 800 through the wisdom to know when peace requires defense." 1 month later, Frank stood in the newly established Defense Academy. Around him, instructors from Earth worked with representatives from all Concord species. Ambassador Harris had negotiated a new agreement. Earth would provide defensive training while the Concord would maintain its prohibition on offensive weapons. Keelan, now the Academy's assistant director, joined Frank at the observation window. "The Council has approved your proposal for a permanent defensive force," he said. "And your philosophical treatise on justified defense is being studied by all species," Frank replied with a smile. They watched as humans and aliens trained together on the Academy floor. "They came expecting to find weakness in our peaceful ways," Keelan observed. "Instead, they discovered something stronger. The will to protect others," Frank agreed. "The strongest weapon of all." Below them, the future defenders of the Concord, human and alien alike, moved in harmony, learning not how to make war, but how to preserve peace.